You watched one video because it was interesting, then another because it was related, then 10 more because the app got better at finding the version of you that doesn't leave. And after enough repetition, something strange happens. It stops feeling like the app is showing you things. It starts feeling like you discovered a taste. Like this is just what you're into now. Your humor, your politics, your aesthetic, your standards. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if you didn't discover that taste? What if you were trained into it? Because the recommendation algorithm does not know what you love. It knows what makes you stay. Those are different things. Here is the part most people get wrong. They talk about the algorithm like it is reading their inner life. That framing is mystical. The reality is much more mechanical. Recommendation systems don't read your soul. They read your behavior, and the platforms are actually pretty clear about this when they explain themselves. YouTube says recommendations are informed by signals like clicks, watch time, likes, dislikes, shares, and survey feedback. Instagram says feed, explore, and Reels use signals like likes, saves, shares, comments, and watch behavior. TikTok says For You is ranked from interactions and gives heavier weight to stronger signals, like finishing a video. That matters because it tells you what the machine can actually measure. It cannot measure intention, values, or whether something improved your life. It measures only what you did. Stopped, watched, replayed, commented, shared, stayed. That sounds obvious, but it's the whole story. Because once you understand that, the feed stops looking like a mirror of your taste and starts looking like something else. Which means the feed is not primarily asking, what does this person love? It is asking, what keeps this person here? And those are very, very different questions. This is where the confusion begins. On a platform, engagement gets treated like preference. But in real life, those are not the same thing at all. You stay on things for dozens of reasons. Love, anger, insecurity, social validation, identity flattery, confirmation bias, the promise of a better self. The system treats them all identically. A video can hold you for reasons that have nothing to do with taste, and the machine does not reliably know the difference. If you watch a train wreck to the end, that still looks like a strong signal. If you rewatch an argument because you're annoyed by it, that still looks like a strong signal. If you keep pausing on luxury content because it makes you feel behind, that still looks like a strong signal. If you hate read the comments, linger on the caption, and send it to a friend saying, "Look how dumb this is," that still looks like a strong signal. So I want to name the structure. I call it the stay loop. The stay loop is what happens when your engagement teaches the system what to send you next, and what it sends you next creates more opportunities to give off the same signals again. You watch, therefore it sends more. You stay longer, therefore it tightens the pattern. You interact again. Therefore the system grows more confident, and because confidence inside a recommendation system usually means more of the same category, tone, pace, aesthetic, argument style, or emotional register, your world starts narrowing without feeling narrow. That's the trick. The loop doesn't feel like restriction, it feels like accuracy. But that's not even the most interesting part. If this were only about what the app shows you, it would still be manageable. The deeper problem is what repeated exposure starts doing to you. There is a reason repeated content starts feeling familiar, then normal, then right. Psychology has a name for part of it. The pond mere exposure effect. The American Psychological Association defines it simply. People tend to show increased preference for a stimulus after repeated exposure to it. Read that again. Preference can increase through repetition. This is not mind control. It's ordinary psychology. Your sense of normal is plastic. Repeated exposure becomes familiarity. Familiarity becomes safety. Safety becomes rightness. Rightness masquerades as taste. That is how a feed can quietly shape your standards without ever announcing itself as persuasion. A skipped song becomes your gym anthem. Noisy editing becomes high quality. Default body ideals. Political extremism as common sense. Productivity theater as maturity. Relationship clips as universal truth. Not because the argument won, because repetition won. This is the part that makes the whole question of taste more complicated. Taste feels personal, feels like identity, feels like proof you're choosing. But you're choosing inside an engineered environment designed to reward sameness with more exposure. When people say, the algorithm gives me what I like, What they mean is, the algorithm gave me what I stayed for long enough to become used to. Used to dresses up as chosen. The platforms interrupt repetition with diversity. TikTok breaks homogeneous patterns. YouTube recommends adjacent unwatched categories. Instagram surfaces new accounts in familiar territory. Discovery happens. But notice its shape. If you watch lifting, you often drift into discipline and hustle. If you watch beauty, you drift into skincare, routines, diet, and body optimization. If you watch geopolitical clips, you drift into commentary, ideology, and personality-led takes. The feed expands sideways from what already held you. That's why it still feels like discovery. You're seeing enough novelty to hide the repetition, enough variation to keep training the system. That's what makes the loop persuasive. It doesn't feel like a cage. It feels like relevance. But relevance isn't neutrality. A feed that guides you adjacent to your last strong signal is not a discovery engine. It's a guided environment. Here is the part I actually care about. This video is not an excuse to become dramatic and say, all recommendation systems are evil and all your preferences are fake. That is lazy, and it leaves you with nothing useful. How do you use these systems without letting them quietly harden into your default identity? 4 moves. First, stop feeding the loop with emotions you don't endorse. Hate watching, doom scrolling, lingering on content that makes you smaller. All training data. The system can't distinguish enriched from hijacked unless you stop signaling. Don't give full-strength feedback to things you don't want amplified. Second, use the controls that exist. Not interested, don't recommend, muted accounts, hidden words. These interrupt passive learning with active correction, and most people ignore them. Third, reintroduce deliberate discovery. Search, subscriptions, saved lists, newsletters, podcasts, people you trust, doorways the loop didn't choose. If the home feed is your only map, your taste collapses into what the app can easiest reinforce. Fourth, diversify inputs before the loop narrows them. Pick 3 things outside your lane and train them in on purpose. Not forever, just enough to remind the machine you're wider than last month. Business, add art. Self-improvement, add comedy. Outrage, add explanation. One ideology, add disagreement. Short form, add long form. Without intentional widening, the loop narrows by default. If this series is landing for you, not tutorials, not hype, just a clearer understanding of the systems underneath everyday tech, subscribe. And if you haven't watched the last 2 in this line yet, start with the one on why free apps aren't free, and the one on what deleting actually does. They connect directly to this. One explains the incentive structure. The other explains why digital actions are rarely as simple as the interface makes them look. Links above. You watched one video because it was interesting. That part was real. You clicked it. You stayed. You were curious. But after that, the feed started learning from every visible version of your attention. And then it started sending back a world shaped around those signals. A little tighter each day. A little more convincing each day. A little more familiar each day. Until familiarity started feeling like identity. That is the stay loop. Not a machine that perfectly knows you. A machine that keeps reinforcing what holds you. And if you're not paying attention, the reinforcement starts sounding like your own voice. Here's what I want to know. What is one kind of content your feed trained you to want more of, even though you never consciously decided to go looking for it? Drop that in the comments. Because I think most of us have had that moment where the feed starts to feel like us. And that is exactly when it's worth asking who trained who. You watched one video because it was interesting. The feed did the rest.